My salary was reduced by $42,000. What the hell? That's not restructuring.
Don't overdo it. The company needs flexible people, not people who are slow with numbers.
I've learned over the years that trouble in a company rarely announces itself. It seeps in quietly. And that morning, it arrived disguised as an HR email asking if I had 5 quick minutes. A harmless phrase to most. But in accounting, it's the kind of invitation that comes with a draft breeze no one else seems to feel. I walked to the small glass conference room, already sensing the temperature drop. Inside sat HR, hands folded too neatly, and beside her, Landon Pike, our young CFO who wore confidence like a suit one size too big. He offered a practiced smile, the kind executives use when they're hoping you won't ask questions. HR cleared her throat. Byron, due to budget restructuring, your compensation will be reduced by $42,000. I let the words settle like cold ash. Restructuring, I repeated, as if tasting it. Even a first-year intern could hear how flimsy that sounded. Still, I kept my voice steady. So the plan is to save money by cutting the salary of the person who notices when the numbers stop behaving. Interesting strategy. HR blinked in panic. Landon didn't. His eyes drifted everywhere except to the stack of quarterly reports he'd been avoiding for weeks. That told me more than any explanation he could have offered. They slid the decision form toward me. I glanced at the signature line and felt a dry, involuntary laugh catch in my throat. The signature belonged not to Landon, not to HR, but to his assistant, a man who once asked me which spreadsheet tab held the money, a pay cut this significant, signed by someone who had never seen a single data set I managed. That wasn't restructuring. That was avoidance. I picked up the papers, offering a polite nod as if this were all completely routine, and stepped back into the hallway. But the air felt different now, sharper, heavier, threaded with something unmistakable. Suspicion, the kind that doesn't fade, and the kind that only grows louder once you know where to listen. My friends, take a moment and roll your shoulders back. You deserve a little breathing room after a moment like that. Where are you listening from today? I always love seeing how far these stories travel. And tell me, what do you think about hitting that subscribe button if you feel these stories speak to something real? Your support truly helps this journey grow. Now, let's step into what happened next, because the numbers were only beginning to whisper. Back at my desk, the office felt strangely muted, as if the building itself were holding its breath. Maybe it was just me still carrying the aftertaste of that pay cut meeting, but even the usual hum of printers seemed softer. I logged into our new ERP system, telling myself I'd focus on something simple, something routine. Quiet work tends to calm noisy thoughts. I opened the prior quarter's report, planning to review a few freight allocations, but the moment the file loaded, the stillness inside me tightened. A line item I knew by heart, long-term freight adjustment. $4.8 million was gone, not reduced, not reclassified, vanished like it had never existed. I blinked once, slowly, the way you do when you're debating whether your eyes or your memory should take the blame. But numbers don't play tricks on me. People do. I checked the revision history. There it was, edited at 1:47 in the morning. 1:47. The exact hour Landon liked to brag about during leadership meetings. My best ideas hit after midnight, he'd say, as though sleep were a sign of weakness. I used to smile politely at that, but now the memory pressed down with a new, heavier weight. I sat back, letting the quiet settle again. Suspicion, when it's real, doesn't shout. It speaks in steady, consistent notes, a missing line here, a late-night edit there, and now, a pay cut signed by someone who barely understood what a ledger was. A colleague from 2 desks over rolled his chair toward me. "Rough morning?" he asked. I gave him a thin smile. Nothing a little data therapy won't fix. Though I hear working at 2 in the morning can inspire some unintended creativity. He chuckled, not realizing the sentence carried more truth than joke. Once he drifted away. I opened the archived directories, our old system. The one we were told to stop using unless absolutely necessary. Today, necessity felt like an understatement. I clicked through the folders until I found the legacy version of the freight report. When I opened it, a small gray window popped up, asking for a password. I froze. Not with fear, but with something colder recognition. The password request wasn't new. It was the one I had set 9 years ago, back when we migrated systems and I was the only one responsible for verifying the data transfers. No one else could open this file. No one else even remembered it existed. For a long moment, I didn't type anything. I just stared at that blank password field, listening to the quiet numbers in my head grow louder, sharper, more insistent. Whatever was happening here, it wasn't an accident. It was a pattern, and patterns always lead somewhere. Most people skim this paragraph, but you don't, right? I typed the old password with a small, reluctant pause, half expecting it to reject me after all these years. Instead, the screen flickered once, twice, and then bloomed into a familiar shade of gray I hadn't seen since the company still used fax machines, unironically. The legacy accounting system looked ancient, but it also felt strangely alive, like an attic full of boxes everyone forgot to open, and just like any attic, it held things people hoped would stay buried. The interface was slow, stubborn, and lacking every modern convenience the ERP system bragged about, but where the new software offered polished dashboards and friendly summaries. The old one presented raw logs, dense, unforgiving, and incapable of lying. Every adjustment, every transfer, every midnight correction lived here in plain text. I navigated to the freight reports, my pulse steady but louder than usual. There it was, long-term freight adjustment pending review. A status mark the new system had erased entirely. The legacy version listed it clearly. Timestamp included. Before noting that it had been deleted 3 days later with no explanation, the ERP file didn't show any of that. It pretended the adjustment never existed. I leaned in closer, curiosity threading with something sharper. If a line worth $4.8 million could disappear cleanly, what else had been swept away, scrolling deeper? I found more discrepancies that weren't massive individually, but added up year after year, like quiet footsteps leading somewhere dark. And then I found the number that made my stomach tighten, a cumulative discrepancy ratio far higher than anything acceptable. It hadn't appeared suddenly. It had grown slowly, almost politely, across multiple financial periods. The new system hid the pattern. The old one highlighted it in bright, undeniable text. I reached instinctively for my notebook, the same one I'd carried for decades. 30 years in this profession had taught me one thing the mind forgets, the hand doesn't. Line by line, I copied the logs, dates, and values, tracing the story the system had tried to tell long before anyone bothered to listen. Then, as I flipped to the next record, a new log entry caught my eye. Not the content, those were troubling, but expected at this point. No, it was the username. It wasn't Landon. It wasn't even a recognized finance credential. It was a shadow account linked to the CFO's access level, but formatted incorrectly. The kind of sloppy workaround someone creates when they know they shouldn't be in the system at all. My pulse quickened, not with fear, but with something far more compelling. Someone had been borrowing the CFO's authority, and they'd left fingerprints all over the past 9 years. The forgotten system remembered everything. The question now was who else did. This is a passage that only good observers can understand. What do you see? The deeper I went into the legacy logs, the more a quiet dread settled over me, not loud or dramatic, but the kind that sits behind your ribs and waits. I knew I couldn't rely on instinct alone anymore. I needed the math. So I opened a blank spreadsheet, took a breath, and typed in the old cumulative discrepancy formula I'd built years ago. Back then, it was just a precaution, a tool for spotting long-term drift in messy supply chain accounts. Funny how the precautions you create to protect a company can eventually become the evidence that exposes it. I fed in the freight adjustment data, the variances, the missing audit trail entries, everything the old system had faithfully preserved. The moment I hit enter, the screen froze for half a heartbeat before delivering a number I hadn't expected. 1.73. I stared at it, waiting for the shock to fade, but it stayed weighty, immovable. A ratio that high didn't appear suddenly. It grew over time, accumulating quietly like dust behind furniture. The only way to reach 1.73 was through nearly a decade of errors, overrides, or deliberate manipulation. 9 years of data drifting off course. My first reaction wasn't anger. It was something colder, astonishment sharpened by logic. Because now the implications clicked into place faster than I could process them: misstated earnings, inaccurate valuations, potential violations that would force the company to restate financials. Restatements trigger panic. Panic crashes stock. crashes lead boards to start asking questions no CFO wants to answer, and to think they cut my salary by $42,000, hoping I'd stay quiet. A small, humorless laugh surfaced in my mind. Poor things. They really did cut the wrong guy. I leaned back, letting the tension in my chest settle into something more focused. The ERP system would never have revealed this ratio, not by accident, not by design. It simply didn't have the logic embedded to capture long-tail discrepancies the way the old system did, because the logic wasn't built into the software. It was built into the formula, a formula only one person ever used, me. Nobody else remembered it existed, not IT, not finance, certainly not Landon, who believed midnight inspiration was enough to compensate for a lack of fundamentals. The realization landed with a clarity that was almost unnerving. I was holding the only thread that could unravel everything, and if the wrong person saw this first, they'd find a way to bury it again. So I did what I've done for 3 decades. Whenever I uncover something dangerous, I documented it. Carefully, methodically, page after page in my notebook, one steady line at a time. Then I closed the file, hands steady but pulse tight with anticipation. 5 million missing was bad. 9 years of drift was catastrophic, and someone was about to learn the difference by the time I stepped away from my desk. My mind was running 2 parallel tracks, one analytical, one uneasy. When those 2 currents overlap, I've learned it's best to take a walk before the tension starts thinking for you. So I made my way to the break room, the unofficial confession booth of any corporate building. The coffee machine was sputtering its usual protest, and 2 junior analysts were huddled near the counter, whispering with the urgency of people who think whispers make them invisible. I poured myself a cup and pretended to read the label on the creamer, which has always been an excellent way to overhear things without looking like you're trying. Yeah. He said the legacy system just complicates everything, one of them murmured. The other nodded. Last night he told us to scrub anything that looks outdated. Said it's slowing down the investor deck. My grip tightened on the coffee cup, not dramatically, just enough for the heat to anchor me. I turned slightly, catching a glimpse of the speaker, Evan, one of our eager young hires who worked late more for the bragging rights than the wages. He continued, oblivious to the landmines he was stepping on. CFO said if we clear out the old numbers, the new system will run cleaner. His exact words were, the old data is the problem. The old data. The problem. For a moment, the room felt too still, not hostile, just dense, like the air was waiting for someone to acknowledge what it already knew. I let the silence linger before stepping forward. Interesting theory, I said lightly, stirring my coffee. Though in my experience, data only causes trouble when it's telling the truth a little too loudly. Evan laughed, unsure whether I was joking. His friend nudged him, and they both muttered excuses before slipping out. I didn't blame them. Corporate survival teaches you to run when someone older, calmer, and too polite starts asking the wrong questions. I sat at the small table, letting the hum of the vending machine fill the quiet. The tension in my chest wasn't explosive. It was a soft, tightening coil controlled, but unmistakably there. A few minutes later, my phone buzzed. An email. From Evan. I almost deleted it without looking, assuming it was some follow-up question about variance reports, but the subject line froze me. Legacy Purge, authorization pending wrong recipient, wrong moment, wrong file to ever land in my inbox by accident. I opened it. Inside was an internal directive outlining plans to erase archived datasets older than 5 years, data the legacy system still housed and the ERP had never fully absorbed. I saved the email immediately. Then I backed it up, twice, soft tension or not. This was no longer a whisper. It was the beginning of a confession. Don't read on, unless you're ready for the most unbelievable part. The break room whisper was still echoing in my thoughts when I returned to my desk, but something inside me had shifted. The uneasiness was gone. In its place was a quiet resolve, the kind that doesn't need volume to be unmistakable. If they were wiping the past, then the past needed a witness, and I had 9 years' worth of one. I opened both systems, the sleek new ERP and the stubborn legacy platform that refused to die. Running an audit trail across 2 environments is tedious in the way meditation can be tedious. Slow, repetitive, but revealing if you sit with it long enough. So I settled in, letting the office noise blur into a soft hum as I followed the digital footprints backward in time. Patterns always emerge eventually. This one appeared faster than I expected. Nearly every adjustment tied to freight, Valuation or cost allocation had been edited between 1 and 3 in the morning. Month after month, same window, same cadence, same subtle fingerprints. It didn't look like the chaotic errors of a junior analyst. It looked like routine, ritual. Even I checked the credentials. Landon's name was associated with the permission level, but the execution didn't match his typical login signature. Instead, a secondary account slightly malformed, misaligned with standard audit protocol, initiated the majority of the edits. A borrowed identity, not uncommon in companies where shortcuts become culture. Still, the timing stung with irony. Landon loved to boast publicly about burning the midnight oil to perfect our investor reports. Apparently, the oil he was burning came from vaporizing data integrity. I leaned back, letting the revelation settle into a calm determination. Shock was pointless now. What mattered was clarity, and clarity meant documentation. I pulled out a fresh sheet from my notebook and began drafting what I call a one-pager, a single sheet designed to hit harder than a 30-slide deck. Bullet points, timestamps, cross-system inconsistencies, and most importantly, the recurring early morning edits tied to the shadow account. A document the Audit Committee wouldn't be able to ignore, no matter how politely they tried. As I worked, my inbox chimed. Once, then again. At first, I planned to silence the notifications, but the sender caught my eye. Legacy system notification. Impossible. It had disabled automated alerts in 2019 after claiming the system was retired, but the email was unmistakably real. Subject line discrepancy threshold. Exceeded. Timestamp 3 minutes ago. My breath remained steady, though something inside me tightened, not fear, but recognition. The old system wasn't just logging the past, it was warning me about the present, and in that quiet, steady moment, I realized we had crossed a line. Not the 1.73 ratio, a different line. The point where documentation stops being optional and becomes necessary. I had barely finished reviewing the legacy alert when a soft knock landed on the frame of my cubicle. Not hesitant, just rehearsed. I looked up to find Landon Pike standing there, hands tucked into his pockets the way people do when they're pretending to be relaxed. "Byron," he said with a smile that tried far too hard. "Do you have a moment privately?" The pre-meeting meeting. Always assign someone is afraid of the actual meeting. I followed him into his office, a room decorated with expensive minimalism and the faint smell of cologne that cost more than the printer toner. Landon gestured for me to sit, then perched on the edge of his desk as if he were delivering a TED Talk. "I just want to say," he began, "your experience has always been invaluable to this department. Always a strong opening line when someone is about to hand you something regrettable." He slid a thin document across the polished wood. "This is a standard reconciliation agreement. It basically confirms that you agree our reported figures align with internal controls. Just a formality housekeeping." "Really?" I picked it up, skimmed it, then looked at him over the rim of my glasses. "You'd like me to sign that our numbers are accurate before I actually look at them? That's bold. Landon, efficient. Even," his smile twitched. "Well, you know how these things go. The board wants to move quickly." "Yes," I said lightly, "and accuracy must never get in the way of speed." He tried to laugh. It died halfway out. The silence stretched until he filled it with nervous chatter. "Look, we're all under pressure. The investor presentation is coming up, and the last thing we need is confusion from older datasets. You've seen how messy the legacy system is. Half that data shouldn't even exist anymore." I tapped the paper thoughtfully. Messy data usually means unfiltered truth, and truth does inconvenience people sometimes. His confidence wavered, then just a flicker, but enough for me to enjoy quietly. He leaned back, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "I just don't have time to fix the system every night," he muttered. He froze the moment the sentence escaped his mouth. Every night. The words hung between us like a dropped glass no one dared acknowledge. He realized too late what he'd admitted. I realized immediately what it meant. So the shadow account wasn't just someone borrowing his access. It was him, or at least him orchestrating it. The late-night edits, the credential anomalies, the vanishing freight adjustment, all of it pointed to one architect. I set the agreement back on his desk with a gentle tap. "Landon, you don't want my signature. You want my silence. Unfortunately. Those two aren't the same." He swallowed hard, the room suddenly too small for his designer confidence. I stood, smoothing the crease in my sleeve. If you'll excuse me. I have an audit trail to finish. Some of us still believe in housekeeping, and for the first time since this began, he didn't try to stop me. He couldn't, because now he was the one running out of time. There's a strange calm that settles over you when you know exactly what you're walking into. By the time I reached the executive floor, that calm had settled so deeply in me it felt like a second spine, steady, quiet, unbreakable. I stepped into the audit committee room carrying nothing but a single sheet of paper. No laptop, no binder, no stack of color-coded charts. Just one page. The directors were already seated. A few offered polite nods, the kind reserved for employees who were either retiring or about to be dismissed. 2 others exchanged a smirk when they noticed my empty hands, as if I'd forgotten the rules of corporate theater. And at the end of the table sat Landon, polished, smiling, radiating the confidence of someone who believed the script was written in his favor. "Let's begin," the chairwoman said. Landon launched into his presentation, each slide a shining monument to selective truth. Graphs trending upward, variances minimized, projections glowing with convenient optimism. He spoke with the ease of a man certain no one would challenge him. Why would they numbers, when curated carefully enough, can hypnotize even intelligent people? I listened, hands folded, heartbeat steady. It wasn't serenity. It was something quieter, heavier, the weight of certainty. Because while Landon spoke in paragraphs, I had brought something much more dangerous, a single value, when he concluded. The room hummed with faint approval. Someone murmured impressive work. Another commented on the clarity of the reporting package. "Byron," the chairwoman said, turning to me. "Do you have anything to add?" I rose slowly, placing my one sheet of paper on the center of the table. No theatrics, no raised voice, just the quiet confidence of someone who knows the truth doesn't need embellishment. "This," I said, tapping the page lightly, "is the cumulative discrepancy ratio across our last 9 fiscal years." The number 1.73 stared up from the page, stark, bold, unblinking. That value, I continued, is not an opinion, it is math, and math is unforgiving. A director near the end of the table chuckled under his breath. "One number," he said. "That's your rebuttal." But before Landon could smirk, the head of regulatory compliance, normally silent, perpetually calm, stood up so abruptly her chair scraped the floor. "Excuse me," she said, voice tightening. "Did you say 1.73? I nodded. Her eyes widened, color draining from her face. That exceeds the SEC's variance tolerance by a factor of 5. Silence hit the room, instantly thick, sudden, electric. Landon's smile collapsed in on itself. His fingers twitched toward his laptop as if he could edit reality the way he edited midnight spreadsheets. I slid the page closer to the center of the table. "You don't have to take my word for it," I said softly. "The legacy system still holds every log, every adjustment, every deletion." The calm inside me deepened, a quiet force, steady as gravity. Because in that moment, every person in the room realized something Landon never had. You can argue with a narrative. You can't argue with a number. The silence after the compliance officer spoke was unlike anything I'd heard in that room before. Not tense, hollow, as if the numbers themselves had sucked the air out, and then, almost immediately, everything began to move at once. "Get legal in here," the chairwoman ordered, her voice clipped and trembling at the edges. One of the directors bolted from the room. Another started dialing on speakerphone, hands shaking as he relayed the words, "No public company ever wants to hear potential SEC variance breach." Within minutes, the general counsel rushed in, followed by 2 senior attorneys who looked like they had been yanked straight out of a meeting they'd been enjoying far more. The page with 1.73 was passed between them, and their expressions darkened with every second they looked at it. "We need to freeze the system," one attorney said. "Now?" Someone attempted to protest, but he cut them off. "If this number holds, every financial statement from the last 9 years is questionable. Shut down the ERP until we can run a forensic audit." Just like that, the IT director was summoned over video call. His face flickered onto the screen, pale and confused, but he followed orders. A moment later, the confirmation came through: system access disabled, all reporting functions locked. That was when the first alerts from the stock feed chimed across the room. Whispered gasps circled the table as the share price of Ellington and Marsh dipped, then dipped again, then plunged, each tick downward, fueled by a rumor none of them understood yet, but felt deeply in their bones. Landon, meanwhile, had begun to unravel in real time. "This is IT's fault," he blurted. "They didn't update the integration protocols. The system pulls old data. It's not me. The general counsel cut him off." "Mr. Pike, until this is resolved, you are suspended from all financial operations. Please step back from the table." The words hit him harder than the market drop. His face flushed, then drained, then tightened as if he were searching for a rebuttal but couldn't find anything that would survive the moment. I simply stood there, hands loosely clasped, watching the collapse with a calm so sharp it felt almost luxurious. After weeks of whispers, late-night edits, and carefully constructed lies, the truth had finally been allowed a microphone. As the room spiraled with frantic calls and urgent instructions, one of the older board members approached me quietly. "You know," he murmured, "before Landon got the CFO job, you were on the short list." I turned to him, surprised but not moved. "I didn't know," I said. He offered a faint smile. "Maybe you should have." But I only nodded, the chaos around us fading into a distant hum. Because in that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not victory, not vindication, freedom. The next morning, the CEO called me into his office, a room that usually smelled like polished wood and expensive reassurance. Today, it smelled a bit more like humility. He stood when I walked in, which was my first clue things had shifted. "Byron," he began, his voice careful, "we owe you an apology, a significant one." He spoke about the oversight, the failure in leadership, the shock the board experienced when the truth surfaced. Then came the promises: my salary restored, my bonus reinstated, and a brand new offer, senior oversight advisor, reporting directly to the board, with full authority to audit anything, anytime. It was generous, respectful, sincere, even, but generosity can't erase exhaustion, and sincerity can't undo 9 years of someone else's midnight edits. So I smiled the small, honest kind that comes from knowing you've already made your decision. "I appreciate it," I said softly. "Truly. But I think I've done enough math for one lifetime." He looked surprised, then relieved. Perhaps he understood that my leaving was cleaner for everyone. I shook his hand, thanked him for his honesty, even if it had arrived fashionably late, and walked back through the halls with a calm that felt almost foreign. No frustration, no bitterness, just the steady warmth of closure. When I stepped out of the building, the sunlight felt different, gentler, like it was acknowledging the quiet victory only I could feel. Justice doesn't always scream. Sometimes it sighs in your direction and lets you walk away whole. The next morning, while making coffee in a kitchen that required no ID badge, my phone buzzed. An email. Subject line, Legacy System Access Request Sender Audit Committee Chair. I opened it, and sure enough, they wanted a walkthrough of the old platform, the one they once dismissed, ignored, and tried to bury. The very system that saved them. I couldn't help smiling. I typed a short reply, attached a user manual from 2014, and hit send. Then, with all the warmth and sarcasm a quiet man is allowed before breakfast, I whispered to the empty room. Turns out the only thing not outdated in that company was the truth. If my story says anything, it's that your voice still matters, even when others hope you stay silent. Tell me, where are you listening from today? And how did this journey make you feel? I'd love to hear your thoughts. If this story resonated with you, leave a comment, tap the like button, and share it with someone who might need a little reminder of their own power. And if you'd like to walk with me through more stories like this, consider subscribing. Your support keeps these moments alive.